And what would be a performance of Deborah?
I kind of think that would be like if there's 4 movement, like a third movement, like a scared silhouette. And it's pretty conceptual, and if there's a performative element, I think it would be the telling of the story, and I think that the telling of the story could be interesting if because we're the composers, if we kind of somehow manipulate or direct Deborah in some way.
Yeah, I think that would be good if we somehow presented her and then she somehow speaks or does something. Maybe tells about the other projects or something.
Yeah, and I think just like poking fun at the role of the composer might be interesting. Like to have a score and be like, you know, just like kind of being patronizing or something, or moving her limbs or something. So to be like, you know,
for 20 minutes you're in
overseeing,
control of Deborah.
Yeah, overseeing.
Yeah.
So it will be a rehearsal of Deborah.
Could you, could you be far apart and you could tie a string to her and then you could pull?
Yeah, I mean,
her-
for me it's kind of fair game, but I think it shouldn't be it shouldn't have music other than like more of a performance aspect. But that's my feeling, because I think the other ones will be very sound based, very rich, very.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's why I thought it would be maybe good for the thing with the Jesu, because we were talking about having less sound stuff there. So it could be and because there's the talking aspect to it, so it's something between a musical work and a discussion.
Okay, so there's this. I like the idea of rehearsing the Deborah piece in public. Public rehearsals are an interesting aspect of this, and so.
So like she starts to talk and then they can interrupt her and you need to tell about this or
Yeah, or you
don't
could
forget.
you start again from there? It needs to be a little. It needs to be a little more about. So you're not correct in pronunciation or anything like in a theater rehearsal. You're actually saying something about the content.
Tempo's a bit too slow.
Too slow, and the content is not right, and we have to come up with terms to talk about this.
Yeah.
But somehow, how to qualify, how to get at a good performance of Deborah Carruthers. Yeah. So.
It could also be that because I like the open rehearsal thing, but I think even for the performance it could work if she's conducted. You know how you conducted the poem, the sneeze, the snoring.
Yeah.
And you know that kind of thing, where it's just like, I don't know, some sort of.
I could conduct the work.
Yeah.
I could
Yeah,
conduct
'cause
you.
you can be
gleeful.
conducted.
3 years of master's thesis, and I never got to conduct you. So now.
Tap, tap, tap.
Tap, tap, tap. Sign us, please.
How did the rehearsal go? She didn't sound so good.
It's a little off on parts.
I mean, this conversation has to be on.
But we could actually do a score of this. We could do a score where it's all silence and talking and fermatas and things. Something you could actually
Yeah.
conduct.
Topics?
And that we could we
Well,
could
that
show it.
that you could perform.
It could
Yeah.
be projected or something. And then and then we could put it at the CNC.
Somebody else could perform you.
That could be interesting.
Yes.
Louis Noël would be like, c'est quoi ça?
So that takes a shape in our heads now. And you said a 3 movement, I like that idea. So it's not only is it, so that means the scherzo means that there's a 4th movement and 2 before, right?
Yeah.
That kind of,
Well, the interesting
kind of a
thing
symphony
is
format.
if that movement starts first, then it frames out the sound pieces that would come after this.
Mhm.
does that make sense?
I don't know, my instinct about putting it like
Put it last?
third or out of four is just, it's more to just be a breather.
Shake it
But
up.
I think we need
Okay.
to know more. I'm not tied to anything. It could be the intro to everything, but I think it might be more humorous if it comes a bit unexpected.
That's
And
true.
kind of like emphasize, I don't know, kind of like, yeah, there was some sort of funny elements before, maybe now it's just like
Mhm. Okay.
official. I don't know. It depends on what else is there.
Could
Yeah, I
even make
mean,
it a
to-
scherzo maybe in a minuet form or with a rondeau, you know? So that there would be a refrain that would come back. Refrain.
ABA.
At the
Yeah.
open rehearsal, we're like, are we really doing repeats?
In a concert, yes, but here,
Yeah.
just skip the.
Yeah.
No, but we would have ornamented
The
repeats, please,
ornamented
yeah.
version.
Oh, yeah.
Please.
So you'd be like,
Double.
Yeah.
you'd be like scratching your head a bit more.
Yeah, but no, it's taking, obviously it's taking shape, so, I'm interested now only in the shape, I'm not interested in the details, we can go on the details in December, but, and we can think about them now, when we know that this is part of it. And actually, when Gabriel said, this sounds like the third movement of something, my idea suddenly became, what if the Jésus performance is really all Deborah's work? And the evening performance is David and Angelique. Then it would be a clean, very clear structure to everything.
Mhm.
And you would have we would still do something of an intro to the entire
It's
project.
just I can't be there, but that's okay.
Yeah, maybe that,
That's
but if
lovely.
you know it now, then
Yeah.
we can play with that, you know.
Yeah.
Still 6 musicians then.
Yeah.
But then it would be conceptually for the audience, it would be a clear thing.
Mhm.
We
That's
show
true.
this in this hall, and then we show the other 2 people in another hall and at another time. It would make absolute sense to do that. So it's not a decision now, but it's just an idea that I suddenly had when you talked
Mhm.
about. So it would be a symphony of
Of Deborah.
Deborahlia.
Devoriana.
Deborahana.
I think
Deborahana.
that our glacier piece is kind of like a slow movement.
Yeah.
It's a
That
very
was
slow
second movement?
It's a very grave. kind of
It
slow
is, but it
movement.
wakes you up.
But sometimes they do, you know.
And I Yeah. like that. It could be a chaconne or a passacaille, you know, so that you have a slow movement on some kind of an ostinato. That could be, you know, that's a good idea to bring us back to the layering thing. You know, if you have an ostinato and we improvise on top of it, your second movement can become a passacaille, you know, or no.
Yeah.
And the first movement could be the auctioneers,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, allegro,
allegro,
sonata form.
sonata form. Yeah.
Oh, and the last one could be an improvisation.
Yeah,
Mhm.
variations,
Yeah.
theme and variations.
Exactly. In rondo form.
And the theme comes from whatever pitch happens when we do the Super Bowl.
Can I play one of those?
No, but that's I know it seems a little stupid to do that now, but we have to do it now.
No, it makes sense.
And it creates a kind of framework for us to work towards. And if we should now decide that we start off with the auctioneer calls, and then we do the glaciers, and then we do the Socan piece, and then at the end an improvisation. I think that's a perfectly interesting way, and then it's a totally different structure from the other pieces, and a totally different situation from the other pieces, and yet it can be presented in a clear way. We could have still an intro talking about ecstasies of influence in general, like the larger context.
That's the slow introduction before the allegro starts.
Yes, exactly, that's the introduction. Grave.
Yeah, the
This
first
is a
grave.
very important project.
À la française.
Earlier you asked.
Oye, oye, don't.
In a poem I read the other day, we must proceed with great pomp and pettiness.
Wow.
Love that.
Prompt and pettiness.
Pomp
Oh,
and
pomp.
Pomp and pettiness.
You asked if the movements should be, just one work, and I think that there's potential in the first one to have it kind of many things, and coming back to your instinct maybe of not seeing the auctioneers as part of the soul counting, even if they're both the cow, and your proposal of, I don't know, I feel like the allegro could be any kind of the sound material that we've found in any project. So the auctioneers, the moths, the birds, conversation. I think they can all blend in a very allegro movement number one. Wait, I don't know. And then we get more in. I don't know. And we could include that. So it's not just like an improvisation on fast things that sound like birds and auctioneers. We could bring a bit of that process that Eleanor is.
Is it gonna be
suggesting.
pre-recorded or performed?
I'm not making the decision yet. No, I think
I need it.
I think working with the recordings might be interesting.
Yeah.
And then working with the recordings and your improvisations or your reactions from the recordings that clearly come from. I even think these auctioneer calls could be something that calls the audience into the hall. I mean, we were talking about how does the audience get into the hall. So if we play very loud auctioneer calls in the inside in the theater and open the doors, I'm sure people want to see what's going on.
My opinion
inside
is that,
and-
that's just my opinion, is that that's taking Deborah's work and showing Deborah's work. And I would not have any of the material of her work present. I would only have the process and our response, like, one of us could make an auctioneer's call or
Oh, that's what I was.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
maybe that's
having-
my assumption. I was kind of assuming
Yeah.
that it would be
Yeah.
a new.
But
it
not
would
the
be-
actual recording
No,
that
no,
you
no, but
already
it would,
had.
but
But
if.
the recording's not her work, that's
The
also
recording
No,
would
but
not.
it's part of her work, and
No.
it's already
Material for her work.
happened.
I was, and maybe this was because I was already making an assumption. I was assuming that if it was an auction call, that it would be,
A version of.
it would be a call, but not mine. It would be a call particular to the movement of the piece. So you'd have to make the auction call. And I can send more links on how to do that. But a lot of it is.
We have two vocal specialists
I
here.
know, I'm sitting there going,
I'm sure you've always wanted to learn how to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah, there was a stupid, like a drone kind of effect.
It was almost 5-1.
Yeah, that was, he was going back to a note, a pitch.
But as an audio score,
Fundamental.
that could work. If we had different sources, so then it's the source,
Yeah.
and then we're just really trying to replicate it, and we don't rehearse it too much. No problem with that. We just like really.
Rehearsals are overrated.
Actually, that could be fun if we
Have
we
the
had
same-
different
Oh yeah.
auctioneers to improvise on top of.
Or a montage. Of,
Yeah.
There's the same, but they're not together.
And the thing is, it actually, just throwing this out, it works well actually with two vocalists, because I think, as I mentioned before, you usually have, the callers can go back and forth. So sometimes, especially if it's a long thing, or if somebody, you've got somebody who's sort of got your back, like especially at these big cattle auctions, because they go on, they're all day, right? So, somebody can start to call, and if something happens, there's also somebody who steps in, but also what their function is when the other person is making the sound is they're the ones that are the spotters.
Mm.
So, like, it's, you're doing the call and you'll hear somebody always coming out where it's like, ha! Or
Yeah.
another noise like that, and it doesn't have to be exactly that noise. They usually everybody picks their own sort of sound that stands out, so that anybody so it registers that somebody.
Well, we could definitely do those
Yeah.
kinds
Mhm.
of interjections with our.
Français de la 50, français de la 50, parce que je français de la 50, hey, français de la 64, français de la 80, français de la 81, numéro 48, français de la 84, français de la 90.
But you could even like comment on the people coming in. I mean, I'm sure it's gonna be people that we know, and that could become part of the performance. Oh, it's so and so coming down the aisle. Oh, there he's going into the 14th row. Oh, he's going in, sitting down.
Baseball.
Yes, it's baseball.
And oh, he's
But-
chosen
and
a seat at the
actually
edge.
that thing of pointing out too, it's actually an important function. So that's a it's got that spatial aspect to it, which is.
Alain Lalonde vient d'entrer dans la salle, Alain Lalonde est présent.
Il sera là, il sera là.
Oh, tu le cruel, ça soit à côté d'Alain Lalonde, qu'est-ce que c'est bon, les sources se sont trouvées.
That would be excellent.
I like that. I think that's already bought now. It's
Yeah.
bought. We'll do that.
The first movement.
So
Please
not
put that in the
pre-recorded.
notes.
Not being recorded,
And-
but we'll work with an audio score. I
Yeah.
like that idea too.
Yeah.
We should try it.
Yeah. And
But should we be, how can I say, because I don't think that I would listen to intonation and not language, you know,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's more
yeah.
like the
Yeah.
idea of like imitating.
I think it's just
The
good to give
gesture.
you the energy.
Yeah.
You know, it's
And
always supplying you with energy.
To be honest, I had no idea what they were talking about on these recordings. I couldn't hear like a word.
Yeah.
I know, it's hard to figure out.
I'm sure even in French I wouldn't understand them. It's a different kind of,
Mm.
it's another language.
It's interesting because I actually went to a French auction to see up in Saint-Hyacinthe I wanted to see how different it would be, and the rhythms, like this rhythm, it's a very particular rhythm that it doesn't seem to matter what language. I also went and listened to one from Kobe somebody sent me recordings from Japan. And I was like, oh, this is weird. It sounds like you doesn't matter what language they're speaking.
Yeah, no.
It's that. It seems to be a universal rhythm.
Yeah. And that whatever the language, no one understands anyway.
No.
And you end up
It's
with
a
a
wonder
cow
how
you didn't
things
know.
get bought.
Guess I have a cow now. I just sneezed.
Because whoever wins, they get Deborah.
I wanted a cow, I have a tuna fish, oh.
The one thing, actually, it's funny about the soul thing. I think there is at the end of it, however you determine it should. At the end, it's also a fairly traditional sort of ending and tapering off. So it doesn't just do where it's sold and then it's like they slow down. It's like what I call it. Like if you were running and you have that you run through, you pass the finish line, and then there's sort of like you keep running a little bit and cool off.
And they say, instead of sold for $45,000, sold for $45,000.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's usually
Okay.
it slows.
The cadence.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
cadence slows and it becomes this
Clear.
like.
It's kind of like reading poetry.
Yeah, it's a different form of the first time that once I started really listening, it's really like spoken word.
Mm-hmm.
I think the glacier piece will be a good contrast to that.
Mm.
Because suddenly to go to something from so much to and people will be also it's kind of funny and kind of like they're kind of involved in hearing this, and then to be brought into a very kind of listening space where we're all listening to something very static, I think will be a very good contrast.
I think it's a nice lead in because it ends that way. It goes from being like 90 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour to like 9. And it's that same kind of, because you slow with the auctioneer pattern, you slow it right down. And I love the idea of having something that's sort of vocal prominent in that as well.
Well, the first movement that could be a section of it too. Like
Mhm.
it would be nice to have the musicians be very active, and maybe that part is
Well,
a
we're
version
bidding.
of. Hmm?
We're bidding.
Yeah.
Yes, but
Yeah, but
we,
that could be like the A
As
of the
musicians.
rondo or
we could
something.
have
We're bidding for
also
the rights to
the
Deborah.
the comments of the audience. We could make the audience.
Yeah, but that's gonna last like I mean, we can
You don't
shape a
understand.
movement where that's
Yeah.
like the A in a rondo form. I mean, it's like a stupid suggestion, but there could be like.
The movements
More-
don't all have to be 20 minutes long, though. They
Yes.
can be
No.
quite different.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
That's a
but
long time.
After
Yeah,
3 minutes.
that's a lot of
uh,
Deborah.
Well, we want our money, so.
And a discussion is also different. I think when there's something to,
Yeah.
you know, when there's words to be.
Mhm.
Telling a story takes time.
Mhm.
What about French and English in this whole storytelling? I've been thinking about this.
Interestingly, and that's something I've thought of when I've been in places like when I've done stuff in, for example, in Berlin, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a conversation with someone about that, and what they said was that when pieces are written in a particular language, they're often performed in that particular language.
Mm.
C'est la vie is how they put it.
Mm.
And so part of me sort of says, okay, I think in the sense that I like having something that and it's something that I've started thinking of, and I do think of language when I work on pieces, like when I worked on something souvenir, like this idea of how the nuance of language is also something that's important to me. But I think one of the things that I also like about sound in and of itself is that it's sort of universal. I agree that the stories are in English. I don't know if we.
No, I'm just asking whether that could be an additional aspect that we could
Yeah,
play with.
Well, I mean, could we assign a bit of roles for the auctioneers thing and plan it out a little more? Like, if it's gonna be the two vocalists, they're so good in French, why not do it in French?
Yeah.
It has a nice,
Yeah.
I think it's super cool.
yeah, and it's kind of funny, like I see stuff like that as being fluid. I
Yeah.
don't see it as, so I think that would
No,
be.
I'm not thinking about just representation or something like that, because Deborah is in English, the piece is in English. If we could also, because it's a language piece, think about what translation might mean in this sense. You know, we're not translating music at all, but we're translating language all the time.
Mhm.
And just to sort of what thought, if there's anything we can do with a French translation to French, which would be something that people would try to do here at any rate. So is there some mileage or some interesting aspect of that we could, that relates, you know, to this? The auctions are language indifferent in a sense, and you come with this language, music is language indifferent, and then suddenly we have a very language-based thing. And is there anything we could do with the fact that there's a French environment and an English environment
Souvenir
that
thing.
makes it interesting?
One of the things I guess I'm just thinking of this, just throwing stuff out off the top of my head. I think this is important to look at, is usually when I've thought of that, it's often that I look for those words that have similar yet different meanings that I've
What does
used
that
in
mean?
works, like traces, trace, you know, where souvenir, you know, and they have so
Faux
somehow.
amis
Mm.
is the word we.
False
so you-
friend.
Yeah.
False friend, yeah.
Well, you see, there we go. False friend, false enemy. But
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's that same kind of sense. So it would be interesting, maybe, to to figure out how to play with that somehow.